I didn't run away from home. I ran toward myself. The morning she tried to turn me into her alarm clock, her caterer, her proof of status, I looked at my hands, lined with years of cooking, cleaning, carrying a family, and thought, no more. By the time they smelled the burnt edge of panic, I would be high over the Pacific, watching a sun I hadn't let myself chase in 4 years. Start at 3 a.m., Kristen had said without looking up, the way people speak to appliances. The words landed like a slap, then slid off me like rain from oiled canvas. Something inside me had hardened into clarity. That evening, the house I helped pay for hummed around me with the comfortable cruelty of habit. 4 years earlier, after Frank died and the medical bills ate through the quiet savings of a good marriage, my son Robert and his wife had said, "Mom, we need you." They framed it like rescue. They held my hands at the kitchen table I had polished for decades and told me I could help with the kids, contribute to expenses, be part of a big, happy family. I sold the home where Frank and I had raised our boy, gave them $200,000 to wipe their mortgage clean, then moved into the guest room and called it ours. It took almost no time for ours to become mine when it's inconvenient and hers when it's not. They asked for school pickups, then dinners, then laundry, then everything. Respect thinned to politeness, then to a shrug. "She helps out around the house," Kristen would tell her friends, her voice honey-slick. She redecorated my room without asking and swept away Frank's photos with a breezy, "It looked cluttered." That was the moment love began to feel like employment. So when she cornered me on Friday night, her perfume a wall between us, and said, 43 people are coming tomorrow, noon. Start at 3 a.m. No excuses this time." I saw my future splayed out on the tile like a broken plate, and I decided to stop gluing myself back together for them. "Of course," I said sweetly, tasting steel on my tongue. She strutted away on heels that said power. I stood alone in the kitchen my money had bought and opened a travel app. Honolulu blinked back at me like a dare. There was a flight at 6 a.m. Perfect. Freedom sometimes looks like a boarding pass. In my room, I packed slowly so the universe could see I meant it. Not enough to alarm them, just enough to clothe a woman who remembered color. I folded the sundress Kristen had called too bright for someone your age and laid it on top. Then I sat at the small desk and wrote until my hand ached, choosing each word like a clean blade. "Dear Kristen," I began, not cruel, just true. I listed what I had poured into this household besides the $200,000, groceries, utilities, repairs, loans that never returned, vacation gifts that were really rescues. The total that stared back at me, $187,000, made even my heartbeat pause. I consider this debt forgiven in exchange for 4 years of disrespect, ingratitude, and emotional abuse, I wrote. We're even now. Don't bother calling. I'll be impossible to reach for the foreseeable future. P.S. There's bologna in the fridge. You remember how to make sandwiches, right? At 2:30 a.m., the house slept the innocent sleep of people who assume you'll never change. I set my letter on the counter, aligned square to the edge like a final act of service, then slipped into the chilly dark and called a taxi. "Airport?" the driver asked, warm-eyed in the rear view. "Yes," I said. And then, because truth feels better when you speak it aloud, "I'm going to Hawaii." He chuckled, then grew quiet, respectful of a woman newly dangerous to her own captivity. By 5:10 a.m., I was through security, lighter than my suitcase. By 5:55 a.m., the gate agent called boarding. At 6 a.m., wheels lifted, and with them, so did I. Off the map they'd drawn for me, into a wide, blue unknown where I would belong to myself again. Somewhere below, Kristen would be waking to silence instead of bacon, to a letter instead of a servant. I could almost hear the first sharp click of her panic. I lifted my plastic flute of terrible champagne and whispered, "To clarity." Honolulu rose like a promise through the airplane window, the light bending gold over an ocean vast enough to absorb 4 years of swallowed words. I pressed my palm to the glass as the wheels kissed the runway, and for the first time since Frank's funeral, my body didn't feel like it belonged to someone else's agenda. At 9:40 a.m., I walked through the jet bridge into warm air that smelled like salt and plumeria, and something inside me, a small, stubborn pilot light, flared into a steady flame. By 10:15 a.m., I was in a taxi again, watching palms flicker past as the driver described the trade winds like an old friend. "First time?" he asked. "First time choosing myself," I answered. He nodded as if he understood exactly what currency I'd finally started using. The resort announced itself with water, a curtain of it gliding over lava rock, a pool spilling into a horizon that blurred the line between human effort and the world's original design. At 11:05 a.m., I stepped into a lobby that felt both grand and gentle, cool stone underfoot, open to the breeze. "Welcome, Ms. Sullivan," the clerk said, recognizing the woman I hoped to become. "Ocean view, 7th floor." She slid keycards across the counter like invitations to a different life. When I opened the door, the room was bright and simple, all whites and wood and the blue beyond, waving from the balcony as though it had been waiting. I set my suitcase down and let the silence prove I wasn't needed by anyone here. Only then did I turn my phone back on. It startled alive with insistence. Missed calls stacking into resentment, texts flickering like a slot machine. Robert, then Kristen, then Robert again. "Where are you? Mom, call me immediately. This isn't funny. Margaret, people are arriving." The chain unraveled through anger into pleading, then snapped into accusation. The final message, small and pure, came from Lucy. "Grandma, are you okay?" I typed with the hands that had raised her father. "I'm perfectly fine, sweetheart. Just taking a little vacation. Love you." Then I powered the phone down and carried it to the balcony like a tiny deactivated bomb. At 12:30 p.m., a waiter set a Mai Tai beside me with a practiced smile. "Another?" he'd ask later. For now, I lifted the cold glass and toasted the invisible havoc unfolding 3,000 miles away. I could almost chart the phases. Kristen's disbelief curdled into fury. The pantry doors swung open to a horror of reality. The clock sprinted toward noon, while the oven blinked its blank unhelpfulness. I imagined Robert's face as he realized the machine he'd leaned on for years was a person with a power cord of her own, and she'd pulled it. I pictured disposable platters, frantic calls to caterers who laughed kindly at 4 hours' notice, and a family reunion fed by cardboard boxes stacked like a monument to consequences. The afternoon loosened its shoulders around me. At 3:20 p.m., I walked barefoot along the edge of the pool, past couples reading and children inventing rules in the shallow end that would change every minute. The spa receptionist offered me an opening at 4 p.m., and I took it. Because I could, because the last appointment I kept for myself had been a haircut that Kristen later critiqued in a casual slicing aside. At 5:12 p.m., I watched the sun sink like a slow, deliberate vow, and felt my heart follow it down into peace. It wasn't that I wanted them to suffer. It was that I needed them to experience the vacuum I had been filling, to hear their own footsteps in the rooms where they'd never noticed mine. That night, after room service and a hot bath that smelled like citrus and clean endings, I turned the phone on again. The screen brightened with fresh noise, but I read only one voice message, the one where Robert's anger had drained into something ragged. "Mom, please, whatever this is, we can fix it. Kristen is upset. People asked about you all day. I told them you were sick. Just come home." I set the phone on the nightstand and let the wave sound take over. Home, I thought, and smiled without bitterness for the first time in years. Home is where no one reduces you to your usefulness. Tomorrow, I would answer. Tomorrow, I would speak the truth in a voice I'd finally found. For now, I slept and dreamed of a kitchen that belonged only to the person standing in it. The next morning, the world felt reborn. Sunlight poured through the balcony doors at 7:30 a.m., soft and forgiving, like the universe had decided to start over with me. I sat with a cup of Kona coffee, the good kind, and let the warmth sink into my bones while gulls traced half circles above the surf. My phone sat beside me like a question I already knew the answer to. When I finally turned it on, the messages came in a flood. 47 missed calls, 63 texts, each one another echo of panic. But it was the voicemail from my grandson Tyler that melted the last sliver of hesitation. Grandma, are you okay? Dad looks like he might cry. Mom's freaking out. They ordered pizza for everyone and it was a disaster. Please call us. I just want to know you're safe. That boy, 15, with more empathy than both his parents combined, reminded me who I'd raised Robert to be before he'd let himself drift into Kristen's orbit. So I called him first. Mom, he said, voice tight with a mix of relief and reproach. Where the hell are you? I could hear clatter in the background, maybe dishes being cleared, maybe nerves. Exactly where I said I'd be, I replied. Impossible to reach. This isn't funny, he snapped. Kristen's been crying for 2 days. The reunion was ruined. Aunt Susan? Why did you lie? I interrupted softly. What? You told everyone I was sick. He sighed, long and heavy, because I didn't want to tell 43 relatives that my mother apparently lost her mind. I took another slow sip of coffee. Did you read my letter? Yes, all of it. Including the part where I listed every cent I've contributed to your household over the past 4 years? He hesitated, the silence on the line heavier than guilt. Mom, you were upset. I don't think— Robert, the total was $187,000. That's not counting unpaid labor or the dignity tax I've been paying since I moved in. Mom, we never asked you to keep track. No, I said, calm now, surgical. You never asked because you never intended to pay me back. I was convenient, a wallet that cooked and cleaned. That's not fair. You're family. Family helps each other. Exactly, I said, which is why I'm helping you learn independence. You're welcome. I heard movement, Kristen's voice, sharp as glass, leaking through the receiver. Tell her she has to come back. She's being selfish. Robert covered the phone, but I caught every word. When he spoke again, he sounded tired. Mom, whatever this is about, we can fix it. Just come home. Home? I let out a low laugh. I don't have a home there, Robert. I have a room in your house and a list of chores. That's not the same thing. Silence. Then smaller. We do respect you. I looked out at the ocean, waves folding over themselves in endless honesty. Your wife called me old-fashioned and cluttered. She threw away photos of your father. She talks about putting me in a senior community because I'm a burden. That's respect? He didn't answer, and for a while neither of us spoke. Later that afternoon, while lounging by the pool with sunlight painting the water gold, the phone rang again. Kristen. I could have ignored it, but curiosity is a stubborn thing. Margaret, she began, her voice smooth and venomous, I think we need to have a conversation about your little tantrum. I almost laughed. I prefer to think of it as a well-deserved vacation. Do you have any idea what you've done? What you've done to me, she hissed. Made you work for a weekend? That must have been exhausting. Her words came faster now, cracking under their own pressure. I had to order pizza for 43 people. Everyone thinks I'm incompetent because you abandoned us. I prefer the term resigned, I said, from unpaid labor. This isn't a joke, Margaret. You can't just leave. Oh, I can. You'll find that I'm very good at following instructions. You told me to start at 3 a.m., didn't you? Well, I started something at 3 a.m., all right. My freedom. There was a pause, long enough to hear her breathing turn cold. Fine, she said finally. You want to play games? Let's play. Don't forget, you sold your house. We own this one. You're dependent on us, and dependent people don't get to throw tantrums. Something sharp and electric rose in me. Kristen, I said, voice steady as a knife, there's something you don't know about that money I gave you. What are you talking about? The $200,000 that paid off your mortgage, it wasn't from selling my house. That money came from Frank's inheritance, separate and untouched. The house money, it's invested, earning interest. She went silent, the way people do when the ground shifts beneath them. And Frank was careful, I continued. He documented everything. Legal loan agreements, interest rates, and collateral. Your house, to be exact. You're lying. Am I? Check your paperwork. It's all there. Loan from Margaret Sullivan to Robert and Kristen Sullivan, secured by the property at 2847 Maple Street. You live in my collateral, dear, and I can call it in any time. Her next words were barely a whisper. What do you want? I looked out at the horizon, waves scattering sunlight like laughter. What I want is peace. What you want is to figure out how to live without me, because I'm not coming back. And for the first time in years, I hung up first. The call from Robert came 2 days later, at 6 a.m. Hawaii time. I was sitting on the balcony of my suite, wrapped in a linen robe, watching the first slivers of sunlight stretch across the Pacific. My coffee steamed beside me, and for once, I wasn't rushing anywhere. "Mom," he said as soon as I answered, his voice quieter this time, drained of all the bluster. "We need to talk." I took a sip before replying. "Good morning to you too, son." "Kristen told me about the loan," he said. "About the paperwork, is it true?" "Every word," I said. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you never asked," I replied. "You just took, and I let you. You assumed it was a gift, not a loan, because you wanted to believe I'd bankrupt myself to make your life easier." He was silent for a long moment, the sound of his breathing rough in my ear. "That's fair," he finally said, his voice breaking. "Your father spent his last year making sure I'd be safe," I continued. "He knew grief makes people vulnerable. He set everything up so no one—" I paused deliberately. Not even his own son could take advantage of me. "Jesus, Mom," Robert whispered. "What kind of son does that make me?" "The kind who lost his way but still has time to find it again," I said gently. I could hear him swallow. "Kristen's been saying things. About you, about the money. I think I wanted to believe her because it was easier than facing the truth." "And what do you think the truth is now?" "That we treated you like a servant in your own home. That we used you and called it family." The admission hit harder than I expected. For 4 years, I'd waited to hear him say it, to see even a flicker of awareness behind the glazed comfort of entitlement. "Robert," I said quietly, "for years I've been waiting for you to see me, not as an extension of yourself, not as someone to fix things, but as your mother, a woman who deserves respect." "I see you now, Mom," he said, "and I'm ashamed." "Good," I said softly. "Shame means you still have a conscience." He exhaled shakily. "Are you ever coming home?" I looked around the suite. The flowers housekeeping left each morning, the horizon spilling endless blue through the balcony doors. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But if I do, things will be different. I won't go back to being invisible." "Whatever you need," he said, "whatever you want, we'll make it right." "It's not about what I want anymore, Robert. It's about what you need to learn, how to live without expecting someone else to carry you." When I hung up, the air felt lighter, like the truth had finally been given its space. I sat there for a while, watching surfers carve bright lines through the water, thinking about forgiveness and what it really cost. Later that afternoon, I had lunch at the resort's oceanfront cafe, the kind of place where time itself seemed to slow down. A man at the next table caught my eye. Silver hair, tanned skin, a kindness etched into the lines around his mouth. "You look like a woman with a story," he said, smiling as he introduced himself. "Jim Nakamura, retired teacher." I laughed softly. "That obvious, huh?" He nodded toward my untouched drink. "You've been staring at that ocean like it's answering back." "It's been a long few weeks," I admitted, and before I knew it, I was telling him everything. Frank's death, moving in with Robert and Kristen, the years of quiet servitude, and finally, my escape. He didn't interrupt. He just listened, nodding slowly, as though every detail mattered. "So," he said when I finally exhaled, "you're not a runaway. You're a refugee from your own life." "Something like that," I smiled. He leaned back, eyes warm and steady. "Then maybe this is your asylum." That night, Jim took me to a local restaurant far from the tourist crowds. Plastic tables, grilled fish, laughter spilling from every corner. Over dinner, he told me about losing his wife 8 years ago, about moving to Oahu to heal, and how he'd discovered who he was when no one needed him to be anything. "Best decision I ever made," he said, eyes reflecting the candlelight. We walked along the beach afterward, the tide whispering against our feet. "Margaret," he said, pausing under a canopy of stars, "I hope this doesn't sound too forward, but would you like to have dinner tomorrow? There's a sunset cruise I think you'd love." The old me would have found a reason to say no. Too soon, too complicated, too improper. But the woman standing barefoot in Hawaiian sand had burned her bridges and learned she could fly. "I'd love that," I said. As I returned to my room that night, the sound of waves folding onto shore, I realized something strange and wonderful. I wasn't running anymore. I was arriving. 3 days later, the phone rang again. This time it was Lucy. I was sitting by the water with Jim, my feet buried in warm sand, the sky streaked coral and lavender. Her voice trembled through the line, and I knew instantly something had broken back home. "Grandma," she whispered, "everything's falling apart." "What's happening, sweetheart?" I asked, my heart tightening even before she spoke. "Mom and Dad had this huge fight. Like, huge. Dad found out some stuff about Mom, about money. She's been lying to him for years." Lucy sniffled. "Remember how she said she couldn't work because she had to stay home with us? She's been working part-time at a boutique for 3 years, getting paid cash so Dad wouldn't know. She told him the money came from you." The sand felt suddenly cold beneath my feet. "From me?" "Yeah, like when she bought that fancy purse last month, she said you gave her the money, but you'd already left, Grandma, so we knew it wasn't true. Tyler and I told Dad, and he started looking into things. He even found out she knew about the loan papers all along. She had copies hidden in her closet." "Oh, Lucy," I said, my voice breaking between pity and disbelief. "Dad moved out yesterday," she continued. "He's staying at Uncle Mike's. Mom keeps crying, saying it's all your fault, that you ruined everything, but Dad said it's not your fault. He said you opened his eyes." I closed my eyes, the ache heavy but clean. "Sweetheart, listen to me carefully. None of this is your fault or Tyler's. And it's not mine either. Your parents are responsible for their own choices." Lucy hesitated. "Are you ever coming home? Dad keeps asking. I think he really needs you right now." I looked at the ocean shimmering beneath the late afternoon sun, at Jim beside me, quietly tracing shapes in the sand. "I don't know yet," I said softly. "But you and Tyler are always welcome to visit me here. In fact, I'd love that." "Really?" she breathed, hope creeping back into her voice. "Especially because of everything that's happened," I told her. "You're my grandchildren. That doesn't change just because the adults lost their way." After we hung up, I sat for a long while, staring at the waves. Jim didn't speak until I did. "My daughter-in-law's lies just blew up her marriage," I said quietly. "And even though I know it isn't my fault, I still feel sad." "Sad for your son," Jim said. "Sad for her too, maybe." I nodded slowly. "She must have been miserable to live like that, so desperate for control she built her life on deceit." He reached over and took my hand. "You know what I think? You're exactly where you're meant to be." The next morning brought another call, this one from a lawyer in Chicago whose name I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, "I'm David Chen from Walsh Patterson and Associates. I represented your late husband, Frank. Certain provisions in his estate have just been triggered by recent events." My pulse quickened. "What kind of provisions?" He explained it calmly, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. "Your husband anticipated that you might face pressure from family members after his death. He created what he called a protection protocol. If you're forced to live away from your residence for more than 30 consecutive days due to coercion or emotional abuse, a trust activates." I gripped the phone tighter. "And what does that mean?" "It means, Mrs. Sullivan, that if you remain in Hawaii for 22 more days, a trust worth $1.2 million will transfer fully into your name, along with a property your husband purchased for you." My breath caught. "A property? What property?" "A beachfront condo in Maui," he said. "Fully paid off. Your husband wanted you to have a sanctuary should you ever need to choose yourself." I pressed my hand against my chest, dizzy with disbelief. Frank, steady, thoughtful Frank, had seen this coming. He'd prepared a future I didn't even know existed. When the call ended, I sat motionless, watching the light skip across the sea. Frank had always been quiet in his wisdom. While I'd been grieving, he'd been planning. He'd known me well enough to know that love sometimes makes us blind, and that one day I might need saving from my own loyalty. A few hours later, my phone buzzed again. "Robert." "Mom," he said, his voice thick with exhaustion. "I found out something. Kristen's been talking to a lawyer about having you declared incompetent. She wanted power of attorney over your finances." The last puzzle piece clicked into place, sharp and final. "Robert," I said steadily, "there's something you need to hear." And I told him everything. The lawyer's call, the trust, the condo, Frank's foresight, every last secret he'd left to keep me safe. By the time I finished, Robert was quiet, almost reverent. "Dad knew," he said finally. "He knew she'd try something like this." "Your father was a very wise man," I whispered. "Mom, I'm sorry," he said, voice breaking. "I'm sorry I didn't see what was happening. I'm sorry I let her treat you that way. I'm sorry I became the kind of man Dad had to protect you from." And for the first time in this entire storm, I cried, not from anger or relief, but because I could finally let go. 3 months later, I stood on the lanai of my new condo in Maui, barefoot and free, the horizon stretching endlessly before me. The air was fragrant with salt and frangipani, and behind me, Jim was kneeling in the small garden he'd insisted on planting. "The plumeria should bloom by spring," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "And the mango tree, give it a few years." I laughed, the sound light and unfamiliar in my own throat. "Planning to stick around that long?" He straightened, smiling in that slow, sure way of his. "Margaret Sullivan, I plan to stick around until you get tired of me, and maybe not even then." The condo Frank had left me was everything I didn't know I needed, small enough to feel manageable, open enough to breathe in the ocean from every window. The community garden below had already pulled me into friendships, other widows, wanderers, teachers, and dreamers. It didn't take long to realize this wasn't an escape anymore. It was home. My phone buzzed on the table beside the coffee cups. Lucy. "Grandma," she said, excitement bubbling through the line. "Dad bought tickets for me and Tyler. We're visiting you for spring break." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, smiling so wide it hurt. "I can't wait to show you around." "There's more," she added, her tone softening. "Dad wanted me to tell you he and Mom are getting divorced, but it's okay. He's happier now. We all are, actually." After we hung up, I stared out at the water, thinking about how much had changed in just a few months. Robert had moved into a smaller apartment, started therapy, and learned how to cook for himself and the kids. He'd found humility, and with it, peace. Kristen, on the other hand, was back at her parents' house, working full-time for the first time in years. She'd tried one last desperate move, challenging Frank's trust in court, but her lawyer dropped the case within a week. The paper trail was airtight. And somehow, amidst all that unraveling, my bond with Lucy and Tyler had grown stronger than ever. Without their parents' tension hanging like smoke over every meal, we could just love each other. They called often, not because they needed something, but because they wanted to hear my voice. "You look happy," Jim said, joining me on the lanai with 2 mugs of coffee. The ocean shimmered like a secret we both shared. "I am," I said simply. "For the first time in years, I'm exactly where I want to be, with people who value me for who I am, not what I can do for them." He smiled, watching a sailboat cut across the horizon. "Any regrets about your dramatic exit?" I thought about that Friday morning, the way I'd packed quietly in the dark, the sound of the taxi pulling away from the curb, the letters sitting on the counter like a quiet revolution. I thought about 43 hungry relatives staring into an empty kitchen, and about the woman I used to be, the one who mistook servitude for love. "None whatsoever," I said finally. "Sometimes you have to burn the bridge to find out you can fly." Jim raised his cup toward me. "To flying, then?" "To flying," I echoed, touching mine to his. The sun was sinking low now, painting the Pacific in pinks and golds. I thought of all the sunsets I'd missed while standing over a stove that never fed me, the holidays I'd spent proving my worth to people who never bothered to see it. I'd spent 4 years trying to earn love that was supposed to be given freely. But that was the past. At 64, I'd learned something no one had ever taught me. It's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to demand respect. And it's never too late to start over. The best revenge, I realized, wasn't watching them suffer. It was watching myself heal. It was laughter echoing off the water, coffee shared at sunrise, and peace so profound it silenced every echo of the life I'd left behind. I leaned against the railing, the wind playing with my hair, and smiled. "Thank you, Frank," I whispered to the ocean, "for giving me my wings." As the last light melted into the sea, I felt utterly, beautifully alive. If you've ever been taken for granted, I hope you find the courage to walk away too. Sometimes freedom doesn't wait for permission. It begins the moment you stop apologizing for wanting more. If you enjoyed this story, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Your story might just inspire someone else to choose themselves too.